Hello and welcome to the Berkcast, the How to Train a Dragon podcast. I'm your host HC, and with me is
Wolf.
and Rush couldn't be with us today for his personal reasons, so he will be back next week, I hope. But to fill in the gap, we have a guest. Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am Haddock, and some of you may know me from Tumblr. I run the blog kingofthewilderwest, where I do a whole lot of how to train your dragon analyses. So I am extremely excited to be here and be a part of this broadcast.
We are glad to have you here, and especially because, to those who haven't kept count, we've reached episode 50. This is insane right there. Like, I can believe it. I've been here all 50 episodes, and I can't believe it. But anyway, we figured out episode 50. We need to do something big, something special. And then one day, I told Wolf and Rush, "Hey, we didn't do the books yet. We should probably talk about the books." And episode 50 seemed like a good place to start. So we asked Haddock here to join us because Wolf told me she's a fan of the books. So I assume it's true?
Absolutely true. Yes. Very big fan of the books.
Okay, cool. So let's get around and talk about the How to Train Dragon books that inspired our favorite DreamWorks franchise, which has been awarded the best DreamWorks movie of all time according to Watch Mojo. If anyone watches them, random trivia. Anyway, so the How to Train Dragon books. So let's start off with our overall experience with the books. What we know, don't know, which one did you start with? Did we know there was a book before them? Just a general retrospective. So, Haddock, you're our special guest. Go for it.
Okay. Thank you. So I actually did not know anything about How to Train Your Dragon at all until my friends pulled me into the movie theater. So I hadn't even seen movie promotions for it, let alone knew that there was a book series off of it. I vaguely knew that there was a book series several years after the first movie had been released, but it wasn't until 2014 when I was preparing for How to Train Your Dragon 2 that I actually took the initiative and started to read them. Mm-hmm. And at that point, most of the books had been out, and I could read through them pretty fast and get caught up all before the second movie came out.
Mm-hmm. And when you picked the books up, did you know if they're related to the movies in any way? Let me ask you this: when you started reading the books, were you aware that they are pretty much different entirely from the movies?
I went into the books also with very little information. I might have heard a few comments here or there that they weren't exactly the same as the movies, but I went in mostly with an open mind, expecting that there would be some things that I would recognize, some things that would be different. So I was willing to give the books a try, whatever they so happened to be and whether or not they related to the movies. So yeah, I still went into the books with very little information as well, which I think actually in the end made it more fun for me to experience. I didn't know what to expect.
Okay. Wolf, what about you?
As I've said before, I got into, when I found How to Train Your Dragon, it was through Riders of Berk, the shows, and that's about the same time I saw the books as well, because watching the show, they would always have, for the show, based on the book series by Cressida Cow. And seeing that's this is a book series, I might have to pick this up and read it. And talking to a few other people in the fandom at that time, a few of them said, yeah, pick it up, read it. It's actually a series that'll surprise you. It gets really dark. And so I was like, all right, you know what? Sure, I picked up, I think, the first 3 books. And at that time, when I got into it, it was around 2012 when Riders of Berk was released, I think. So I think, at that time, 10 of the books were out. So I had a good bit of reading to do. But picking up the first 3 books, that's when I got into it. Haddock said she went into, the series very, very little expectations. So did I. So I went into it and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so kind of like if people remember my story about how I got into How to Train Dragon in general, you might remember me not liking the trailer and going to check out the movie just because I saw the ratings and yada yada yada. So I had no idea there was a book, and also not a bookworm here, like at all. I am not really into books. I read a few books, but I'm not a books is not my media. Let's say this. And after I came out of the first movie, I was interested. I researched it, and then I saw that it was based on a book. I'm like, huh, okay. And then I read that originally the movie was supposed to be heavily loyal to the book, and I'm like, okay, so what was the book like then? And then I heard that Toothless is not a Night Fury. There is no such thing as Night Furies in the books, at least as far as I'm aware. And I read some stuff, and then around it, just before How to Train Dragon 2 came out, like around a year before, I came across the first book on a bookstore, and I said, well, if there's a movie I like and I know it's based on some sort of source material, I'll check the source material out just to compare. So I got the book, and I enjoyed it. It was fine. And then I said, well, how many other books are there? I saw 12. And I said, well, I'm screwed. especially because until yesterday, I was sure the first book was the only one which was translated and brought over here. And then yesterday, I found How to Be a Pirate and How to Speak Dragonese, the second and third book, respectively. And I said, well, we're doing the books tomorrow. Might as well read them, bought them, finished them about an hour ago. And yeah, that's my experience. I read only 3. I am aware that apparently How to Train Dragon 3 is supposed to end similarly to the last book. And I know of a few plot points here and there. And by the way, spoilers to the books, to those who are listening. You should probably say it now.
Yeah, this is probably the non-spoiler part. After this, probably spoilers.
Yeah, do you want me to preface before I start speaking really big spoilers?
Let's say this was our allowed. Like, if people don't want to be spoiled, stop it here, read the books, come back. And if you don't care, like me, because I'm pretty much going in with full spoilers, and yeah, spoilers from now on.
Perfect.
Okay, so our next topic of conversation is what do we think about the books overall? Do we like them, dislike them? Would you recommend them? Is there something special that you like about the books? Haddock, again, you're the guest. Why won't you start?
All right. I will try not to speak an entire, speech about this, but the short answer is I love the book series so much. I have always grown up as a big bookworm, but I don't tend to read books that have a lower reading level usually. But I absolutely adore the How to Train Your Dragon books. They are some of my favorite books ever. And it's because there's this emotionality, there's an intricacy and a depth to them. The low reading level doesn't mean that these books lack beauty and depth. Adults can get a lot out of them, and they tackle issues that are extraordinarily deep. So, it does not shy away from concepts even like war, slavery, and genocide. So, absolutely love them. I do recommend them, but I always come in with some warnings to people, especially from the movies, just so that they know a little bit of what to expect with the books and don't get surprised by the differences between the books and the movies.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and is there anything in particular you like about the books? Something that struck you as special about them?
I find the entire series extraordinarily special. There's this beautiful heart to them that even though the stories become increasingly dark, there's always that shining hope. And I love the fact that these books can create something that feels optimistic, despite the fact that even in the end of the book series, the dragons do leave. Hiccup is not successful in his own mission to fully bring humans and dragons together. It's always that interesting balance. And it's also, I think, beautiful because of how it treats concepts like forgiveness. The idea of showing love, sharing love, and being so forgiving. I feel like there's a very specific power in how those sorts of concepts were developed.
Okay, interesting. So, Wolf, what do you say?
Ooh, I think.
You want me to go first? Or?
If you want to, go ahead.
Okay, so basically, I like the three books that I read. I'll say How to Be a Pirate and How to Speak Dragonese are better than the original. The original kind of feels like a setup to the world, while these two feel like actual stories in the world. But it's not to say that the first book is bad by any means. I enjoyed reading through it, and I will recommend them to people, especially if they watch the How to Train Your Dragon movies. I'll definitely recommend. I'll give them a cautious recommend to see where it all started. But then again, I'll say keep in mind this is almost nothing like the movies. Like there's almost no connection. But I'll say, yeah, sure, give them a read. And one thing I really like about them that makes them special to me personally is that they sometimes go out of their way to, like Cressida Cowell goes out of her way to make this a brand new world. Like if you look at the covers for the books, you'll see like so let's say, because of its why I hate it right here in front of me, How to Speak Dragon is written by Hiccup Hernandez Haddock III, and then it said translated from ancient runes to English by Christina Cowell. Like she treats it as this was an actual world that existed. Like she found those old books and she's translated them, and that in the first book, when Hiccup and Fishlegs are opening the actual How to Train Your Dragon book, the pages look like the cover of the book. And in How to Be a Pirate, they show you the treasure chests they're going all about. So I like this kind of, it's a very interesting way to build a world and, get the readers immersed in it. So that's pretty special to me. I haven't seen other books do that. So, yeah, that stuck out to me.
Well, for me, like everyone else here.
No escape, Wolf. Now you have to talk.
Go for it.
For me, like everyone else here, I would definitely recommend the books. Generally, when I recommend the books to people, I like to recommend they actually start with the second book. Like, the first book is definitely worth reading, and having read all 12 books, I can assure you the first book is an amazing setup and great foreshadowing to a lot of things that happen later and you find out much later. Like, I've said it in the past, the first book is an amazing opener, and I will stand by that. It is an amazing opener. But I think for a lot of the things people would start to recommend the series for as a whole, that really starts in the second book. That's when you really start to see, like, this is what the series is, this is what it's going for, this is what it's trying to achieve, and that's how I recommend it. If you can pick up the first three books, read the first one, but the second one is really where the series really starts. The first one is it can kind of stand alone on its own for the most part.
That's really interesting of you to say, because I'm always so stickler to reading things in order, and the books you do have to read in order later on.
Oh, yes,
but
absolutely.
you bring up a good point, and it's one that I sort of I do that cautious recommendation in a different way. I always warn people, number one, that they're very different from the movies. Do not expect it to be the movies. You'll see their parallels, but it's not going to be the same. And the second thing I recommend is lots of people get thrown off by the first book's sort of juvenile nature. It has this very naive, innocent feel to it, and lots of people are so used to the high stakes that start in the first movie with giant battles and so forth.
Yeah.
So they get thrown off by the first book. Hiccup's worried about, Toothless pooping in the bedroom. So they're not used to that.
Yeah, I did. I remember when I read this, when I first got the book, I was like, really? And also in How to Be a Pirate, they actually dedicated a full scene and a drawing of Toothless taking a shit in Alvin's helmet.
Yeah.
And apparently that's a plot point in the third one. This is something that was carried over,
Yep.
which I don't know how to respond to actually. This is interesting.
Yes. So I always give people the warning they start innocent and then get increasingly darker. So for some people love the early charm, other people want more action. I always tell people keep reading. Keep reading. You will not
Absolutely.
regret that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to. You were giving your opinion of the books. I don't want to jump in like that.
That's absolutely fine. We do it to each other all the time, so feel free.
Yeah, we interrupt each other all the time.
Don't give me too much power.
Okay, so Wolf, do you have anything to add? Or...
As with the recommendation, I would say, one of the things I majorly like, and Haddock kind of pretty much touched on this really well, is that Cressida Cow, when she writes these books, every single one of these books, in my opinion, are written in a way that, like, yeah, they're written for a younger audience, but they respect that younger audience. They take into account that they're not foolish, they're not stupid. Just because they're younger, they still can understand and get a lot of things that you would, that kids that age would be able to understand and get. And we take that for granted a lot of times, but she doesn't when she's writing. She respects them and their mindset, their intelligence, and you can tell that's how these books are written. And I think that's why these books can actually be enjoyable for an older audience as well, because, again, they respect their audience. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love and adore about these books the most, I would say.
Also, one thing I noticed after reading the other two is that I noticed that the main like moral of these books, and to some extent this was carried on to the first movie, is that it really touches upon the fact that it's not bad to be an individual and different. And I think that's a really good message to teach, especially nowadays, that everyone tries to be like the next cool kid that does something. That individuality is good. You can be different. You should be different. I think it's a really good message to teach, especially for kids, because kids are very impressionable and want to be like the other big guys, if you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely. There is that whole message of Hiccup being a unique one. The fact his very name Hiccup is meant to be basically for those who are, born different than the rest of the Vikings, that weak person in a society where only the strong belong. But the fact that Hiccup is not only amazing as an individual, but that he can revolutionize everybody around him for the better.
Yep, I agree. Definitely agree with that. Okay, so moving on I wrote to those who read more than one book because I didn't take into consideration that I'll have the luck I had. But so which one of the books is your favorite?
Okay, I say definitely How to Betray a Dragon's Hero. For people who might not remember all the names and the orders because the names have similarities, that's book number 11. And
11, okay.
Yes, so number 11. It's the darkest part of the story. And it's the book where the stakes feel the highest. The world has descended into chaos. And it's the point, what I love so much about it is that it's the point where we really see Hiccup come into his own as a dramatic, admirable, adamant hero. There's that scene where he tells Excalibur, no matter what you do, I will not give up. So that part just really resonates. It's the point where Hiccup actualizes. And then also for people who are familiar with number 11, it's the story with a very memorable and highly emotional scene that can make you cry.
Took into consideration. And what did I want to say? Isn't this book, or maybe two books before actually, that I heard that either book 9 or 10 end with Cressida Cowell actually telling the readers to stop reading the series on that book if they want a happy ending.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that was.
that was book 9.
Yeah.
It was before
Oh.
everything just crashed down. It was near the end of book 9. You're right.
Okay, so it's true. Nobody lied to me. Good.
Yeah, because book 9 is, if I'm not mistaken, the book where Hiccup leaves, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So I remember the point where Cressida Cowell says, "You should stop now," is right at the point where Hiccup wins the sword fighting competition. He's about to become crowned King of the Wilderwest, which we're starting to get the hints of he's prophesied to be. And then the slave mark gets revealed, and everything gets chaotic. He gets exiled. The dragons and the Vikings start this three-way war. Yeah, so she definitely gives that warning right before the slave mark is revealed with Hiccup, and he gets banished, and everybody starts fighting each other and destroying the entire world that they live in.
Sounds happy.
Every single time that you think that the story can't get worse, it does. It's so great.
Man.
Go ahead.
I just want to say this sounds like if these books were like came out earlier, like around 80s or 90s, I would love to see Dan Bluth directing the movies because it sounds like his forte. Like once you think everything couldn't get worse, it gets worse. That's like his thing.
Secret of Nim, man.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
My favorite
just
movie.
Yeah, I love Secret of Nim. I like Dan Bluth. Everything pre Rockadoodle pretty much included, but yeah, that's another story. And so, Haddock, just to sum up, you said you like book 11 the most.
Absolutely. I love the charm of the early half of the series, but when everything starts getting chaotic is really where I feel that the story has just the most content that's beautiful and sings with me. So yes, book 11.
Okay, Wolf, which one is your favorite?
For me, personally, I enjoy the third book the most. And my reason for that is because for me that was, I like I said before, I think the second book is where we first get the start of our adventure on is where we get our start of Hiccup's adventure of him learning to become a hero the hard way. You hear that a lot throughout this entire series, right? Mm-hmm. I say that's where that adventure first starts, but the third book, How to Speak Dragonese, that's where I feel Hiccup changes, right? In the third book, we see him still being dependent on his father somewhat. In the third book, if I'm not mistaken, Toothless is captured by the Romans. Yeah, the Romans exist in these books.
Yeah, I remember. I read it and I was like, okay, that came out of nowhere, but hey, that's cool.
Kind of does.
Cool.
But
she loves just historical anachronisms. They're everywhere. It's its own charm.
Absolutely. But it's he's captured by the Romans, and he wants Stoic to desperately go after him. Stoic doesn't, so him and Fishlegs decide to take matters in their own hands and go rescue Toothless themselves, and in the process end up getting captured themselves as well. And if I'm not mistaken, in that book, it has been a little while since I've read them, but a decent portion of that book is basically Hiccup saying, no, we can wait. My father will come for us. We'll be safe. He'll come rescue us. I can depend on that. I can expect him to come save me.
It's not a decent amount, but it is there for a few chapters.
Yeah, it's there, and it's him talking about it, and it's him expecting it. But in this same
well,
book,
then again, chapters in book 3 specifically, you guys tell me if this goes on. A chapter could be like 2 pages and a drawing, and then the next chapter begins.
That stays common throughout all the books.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember
because I remember I got to chapter 14 and I'm like, okay, I'm in next page, chapter 15. Well, that was quick.
Yep.
Yep.
I remember being surprised by the exact same thing in 1 or 2 of the other books as well. It's like, wait, Really? 1 page? Wow.
Can you imagine
Unexpected.
the apple, like you finish all the chapters of the final book, and then like you see epilogue, Hiccup and Toothless die, and then the book closes, the book finishes. That
boy.
would have been the meanest troll ever.
Okay, speaking of meanest troll, I'm pretty sure this was accidental formatting, but if they did this formatting intentionally, I would be so angry. Is that it's in book 8, sorry, How to Break a Dragon's Heart, where Excelinor is telling Hiccup the story of Hiccup the Second. And you turn the page, and the first sentence at the top of the page is saying Hiccup the Second dies. That was the meanest thing ever.
Let me tell you the story about one of your ancestors. He died.
Oh, it was so mean. You turn the page, and it's just, yep, and his father stabs him, and he dies. And you're like, what?
Man, it reminds me. Have you guys seen the movie James and the Giant Peach?
Yes.
I have not.
Okay, so it's not a spoiler because it literally happens at the beginning of the movie. That like you see James and his parents like talking on a beach, planning to take a vacation or something, and then all of a sudden the narrator says this, and then all of a sudden a rhino came in and ate his parents, like out of nowhere. That's how the movie ended. And I was like, what?
That's great.
Strange movie.
Yeah, and I can't. You know what? We're into this. I just have to tell about this. That I don't remember who did this parody. That like you see in the Lion King, the scene where Mufasa shows Simba the Pride Lands, and he tells him, "Look, Simba, everything the light touches is our kingdom." Wow! And then the rhino ate him up, and the rhino comes up. It's Mufasa. The end. Pretty much the same thing. And man. Okay, so before we tangent a bit too far, my favorite of the 3 I read is How to Be a Pirate. And, something about that specific adventure felt endearing to me. I don't know. It felt like decently paced, it didn't drag too much, and I think this was the point where I really started noticing the message of being the individual is not bad. If anything, it's a good thing. I think it really showed in the second one, and then the first and third one as well. But something about the second one stuck with me, especially when that Hiccup has the chance to become that heir of Stuart become that hero that Snarl doesn't think he could be, and he pretty much gives up on it, and he says, "I know I found this. That's fine to me. I just want to live to tell that story, even if no one believes me." I don't know. There was something very endearing about it, because in every other story he would find a way to get a treasure back, and then he would be the hero, blah blah blah. So that was a really nice turn of events, which kind of it's a thing that also happens in the DreamWorks franchise every once in a while, that the traditional ending is not the ending you're necessarily getting. So I thought it was cool.
Which is definitely an enjoyable thing that the book series does quite often, where it tends to flip stuff on its head more than you would expect. And to kind of finish up why I think the third one is my favorite, for me it's when I think the third book is where we truly see a change in Hiccup's character for the beginning half of the adventure, in how he decides, like, for me I think that's his point where he decides, all right, I can no longer always depend on my father to kind of bail me out of every situation. And he didn't really necessarily think that entirely, but he did depend on Stoic more, and he learns to depend on himself more at that point, and to kind of trust his own judgment and his own intellect and his own ability to do things.
Even when everyone tells him that his plan is doomed, he still goes along with it.
Mm-hmm. absolutely.
And we also meet an enjoyable character in the second book, in the
Woo!
third. Kamikaze.
You said second. Kamikaze is in
Third.
the third one.
I meant third, sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Kamikaze. And that's another reason why you have to keep reading beyond the first book, is Kamikaze is one of the best and most memorable characters of this book series. You have to get to her.
Yeah, so I got to her. That means I can stop. No, I'll try and find the other books eventually. Maybe the audiobooks with David Tennant. That should be fun. Mm-hmm. I can't wait to hear David Tennant like dub a female character, and then everyone remembers that they whined about a female Doctor Who.
Oh, there you go.
For clarification, I don't really watch Doctor Who. I just know that everyone complained about the female one, and that's really stupid. But and actually, one thing I do want to mention about the third one, if we're on the subject, we do know that Kamikaze's mother's name is Big Boobied Bertha. And for some reason, I don't know why, but the way they translated her name in the translated version of this book is Mega Boobied Bertha.
Yeah. That's even better, because in the book, like, they give this description of birth and they talk about how she's suffocated like stags between her breasts.
Yeah, there's a drawing of her in the book, and there's an actual note saying, these boobs killed someone, and they will probably kill again.
Yep. The book is still for, adults, people.
Yeah.
It's just got that humor in there too. It
Which
makes
is
it
great.
better.
Yeah.
It's so great, yes.
So, excuse me, while for the rest of my days, I will still call her Mega Boobied Bertha. This sounds so much better. Okay, but so we said what our favorite of the books is. So now let's just talk a bit. Let's compare the books to the movies a bit, like, just pretty much everything. Are you guys ready?
Oh, I could go on forever.
Okay, so let's try and condense it. There's one thing I do want to point out, that we talked about how, at least in the beginning of the book series, the books are a bit lighter in tone than the movies. The movies are darker at the beginning. Like the original movie is darker than the original book. I think we can all agree on that, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, even though the books have a lighter tone, a lot of these characters are really mean-spirited. Like, Gabber is a lot more asshole-ish than in the movies. Snot-Out is pretty much... But I was surprised about Fishlegs. Like, Fishlegs is really cynical in the books, which I like, don't get me wrong, but it's really different. Like, it kind of makes you think, why is they called the movie Fishlegs to begin with? It's not that cynical.
Yeah, and even though Book Hiccup does have a lot of sarcasm to him, it's really Fishlegs who is the sarcasm master of the book series.
Yeah, there are a few points where, especially in How to Spade Dragon Age, where I'm like, yeah, Hiccup is the character who was kept mostly the same, but every time there were and I think in the third one he also gets the more sarcastic comments that his movie counterpart has. But yeah, Fishlegs really does deliver the sarcasm in these books, which is cool. I like this.
Absolutely, Fishlegs.
Can you imagine this Fishlegs being Thor Bone Crusher?
Oh goodness.
In some ways, he does. He has the moments of it here and there.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, Thor Bone Crusher, I think, is definitely kind of a little bit of a nod back to Fishlegs from the books. Yeah,
maybe we'll actually get to it in a later topic of this episode, but continuing on with the comparisons, Toothless himself went through a really big change, as we all know. First of all, there's no Dragonese in the movies, which do you think it's a good change or a bad change?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the way that I think about the changes between the books and the movies is that it's hard to compare the two most of the time, because movies tell very different stories than books do. So DreamWorks did a series of changes that you can see. They took the original content from the books and they did a series of changes after changes to make it more adaptable to a good movie. And so for me, I'm like, Cressida Cowell did what was best for books to be books. DreamWorks did what was best for movies to be movies. And I think for the sense of the movies, taking away the Dragonese was a very intelligent gesture, and it made the story very good. But at the same time, I would never say take away the Dragonese from the books because of how important it is for the dragons to have their speaking voice.
Yeah. Actually, you mentioned Cressida Cowell herself. I was surprised at how well she was respectable of the movies, and she actually said that with adaptation you have to make changes, and even though that there were a lot of changes in the movies, they still kept the book's message, which was the thing that was important to her. So good on her for accepting all of this, really, because any other author will just be like, nope, don't want my name on this.
Again, I think she's very understanding of different mediums and how you can send that message through those mediums. You know, like movies, you always hear the adage, show, don't tell, right? In a book, that's not always the case. Like, you know, there's always a lot of tell
when I think about it, a scene like Forbidden Friendship would probably not work as well in a book as it worked in the movie, I think.
Very true.
And
it would be very differently.
And I think she's something about
yeah, she is. Coming back to Toothless himself, I do like the idea that he's like this rare species, the Night Fury, and not this because even though he doesn't have any, I do like the fact that he's literally toothless and not the civilian. You know that he does. You know. He really doesn't have any teeth in the book. Right? Well, in the movies he does have teeth, but they're retractable. So the name still fits, but I like the fact that he's literally toothless. And that Snuffles apparently gave him his name, all things considered. And also, I did like how they kept Toothless as sassiness in the movies, even though he doesn't have any dialogue.
Yeah.
Even though he's sassy and everything, I'll say movie Toothless is a lot friendlier and more loyal to Hiccup than book Toothless.
No contest.
Like I'm on strike. I remember I read this and I was laughing my ass off. Like, yeah, movie Toothless will never do this.
The best strike scene is the one in How to Ride a Dragon Storm, where Hiccup is tied up to the mast of a ship. The ship is burning. Hiccup is drowning. And it's during this point. Oh, and of course, Norbert the Nutjob is trying to kill Hiccup. You know, everything is chaos. And it is at this point that Toothless goes on strike. Again.
My God. Yeah, movie Toothless is a lot nicer. I'll say that one. And one final thing to say about Toothless is that just let me finish this one. Before I read the book, Wikipedia wrote that apparently Toothless dies in the original book, and I was like, what? No, this can't happen. And then I read the book, and I'm like, oh my God, they actually killed Toothless. What the hell? And then all of a sudden he's alive, and I'm like, who won the Wikipedia page again? Like, that's why I was sure Toothless dies in the first book, and thank God he didn't, but yeah.
I want to point out something. You said in the first book, Toothless from the books is a very rare species of dragon. Without spoiling anything too much, I have to ask. I have to say, like, Haddock is probably sitting there like me, in the thought process of, you have no idea.
Absolutely.
I've heard that he's apparently a position of a king or something.
I mean, I guess, you know, we are in kind of spoiler territory at this point. Toothless, and this is why I always say the first book is an amazing opener, and if you've read all 12 books, you can go back to the first book and you can see things that at first you might think, oh, you know, this is just embellishment, that this is just, you know, her having fun with the writing. But looking back at it, I would swear up and down that she had it planned from the very beginning. She knew exactly what she wanted to do and what she wanted to write, because, like, it's too specific. It's way too specific. You know, you hear Fishlegs talking about how Toothless is a rare species of dragon, and he grows to be gargantuan size. Well, that is absolutely true. He is a rare species of dragon. That is known as, you know, he is, and you see, he is a rare species of dragon, and you see in the first book what he gets to grow up to be eventually.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Red Death, the Purple Death, and if I'm not mistaken, the Blue Death, is it? Or the Green Death? Yeah, the Green Death.
Yeah, Green Death.
That's what he eventually becomes. That's Toothless in the future.
Oh,
just
God.
not as mean.
You know, there was this theory that apparently, you know, in the movies, everyone said that Hiccup is that's a hiccup around the Haddock itself. There was a theory going on that has been disproved many times, but that apparently the Hiccup in the books is the first Hiccup, and then the Hiccup on the movies is like his descendant. So yeah, maybe the Red Death in the movie is a Toothless fully grown. Go figure.
I've heard it a bit differently. I've heard the theory is that Hiccup in the movies is the first Hiccup, and Hiccup from the books is his descendant. Is what I've heard.
Oh.
I've heard a lot of theories.
But
so I've heard that theory. I've heard also the theory that Hiccup the first represents Hiccup in the first movie, Hiccup the second represents Hiccup in the second movie, and Hiccup the third represents Hiccup in the third movie. I don't agree with that assessment, but it's an interesting interpretation.
Yeah, because I think, you know, that could have been maybe a theory worth defending if it wasn't for writers of Berk kind of throwing the concept out of the window and saying that our Hiccup is the third one in the Demox universe anyway.
Yeah. I also think the theory gets disproved in the fact that when How to Train Your Dragon, the first movie, was made, we hadn't even had Hiccup the first make an appearance in the book series yet. That was far from being published.
Okay. So just to really close this subject a bit, because we kind of went off topic, which is fine, but, you know...
It's the Berkcast, we do that.
Yeah, we do that. Anyway, one thing I did want to ask you, Astrid or Kamikaze?
I think they're both good characters in their own rights, right? I think Kamikaze is vastly different from Astrid. Vastly different.
Does she get any more different in the following books? Because from the third ones, they were pretty similar to me. Like, Kamikaze may be a bit more of a show-off than Astrid, but other than that...
I mean, she stays a show-off for pretty much all of the books, right? Like, that's just her character. It's a part of her character, and the Bog Burglars in general. That's who they are. They're show-offs.
Yeah.
But I would still say, even then, like, as the books go on, like, you learn a bit, and Kamikaze is featured more and more. You do learn more and more about her, a little bit more about her character, and she's definitely, again, I would say she's somewhat different from Astrid. I think her and Astrid would probably get along if they met each other. Actually, I would take that back. I would say her and Astrid would probably not get along if they met each other.
Yeah.
But she's definitely different, and I think there's something to appreciate differently about each character.
I like that a lot. There is something to appreciate about it, each character. Astrid is a little bit more of the firmer character. You know, she has that cold side to her, but also the sympathetic side. A huge amount of empathy that you can see through her, especially as she helps Hiccup through his problems. Kamikaze is someone who actually struggles a bit with that sort of empathy. And she's also someone, in contrast to Astrid, who is this ebullient, happy-go-lucky, always excited chatterbox. And that's a very, very different personality than Astrid.
So she's like Astrid in the Longest Day episode of Race to the Edge.
It gets closer.
Okay.
That's, saying that about Kamikaze, that's why it's really great for the ninth book and what it does for her character. Like, it's such an amazing thing that it does. Amazing, not in the good sense of the word, I would say. Like, it's unexpected. It's amazing in that it's unexpected and you wouldn't expect to see it.
Do you mind filling me in? This is spoiler territory.
Okay. As the ninth book is pretty much, as Haddock said, it's one where kind of things start to turn bad very quickly.
Everything goes to shit. Yeah, I get it.
Kamikaze is someone, up until that time, she's been staunchly with and for Hiccup. She's always stood behind his back. She's always had his back. She's always been there for him, as has Fishlegs. But in that moment, she doesn't. Everyone's turning. Everyone chooses, like, hey, Hiccup could be the king of the Wilder West, but everyone chooses to turn their back on him. She does also, in that book.
It's a beautiful moment because, first of all, we have Fishlegs is the only person who sticks by Hiccup's side, and he basically kneels down at Hiccup, gives Hiccup the gift of his lobster claw necklace, which ends up being significant later, and he dedicates his loyalty to Hiccup. He's like, I don't care that you have the mark of a slave. I don't care that this is what society, would throw you away at this point. You are my king, and I will forever follow you. And then there's Kamikaze, the person who always has believed the best in Hiccup. In some ways, she forgot Hiccup's flaws because she looked up to him so much as a friend. This is the point where Kamikaze's world comes crashing down, and she truly sees Hiccup from a new light. And it's the not completely rose-tinted perspective that she has before. And she's so shocked at this that, no, she does not defend Hiccup. She sticks with the rest of the crowd, and it's something that she has to learn how to come to grips with in the following books.
Interesting. Okay, so that kind of really makes me want to ask this more, because, people are going to compare Astrid to Kamikaze because they are the female characters of the franchise, but do Kamikaze and Hiccup have a future romantic relationship in the books, or is that not a thing?
I've seen people bring it up and talk about it. I would say, I guess there's a possibility, right? But I don't think the books ever write it in such... they're never explicit about it. They never write it in such a way that you would feel like, these two are going to end up together.
So it's up for interpretation.
The only hint that you get that Kamikaze might be interested in Hiccup is in around the second to last chapter of the final book. And even then, I'm someone who personally doesn't like to read that scene because what was so beautiful for me was it was a story of three friends going through adventures together. Hiccup and Kamikaze throughout the series are friends.
I would agree.
Okay. We thought I'll ask about it because, people love Hickstrid so much, so might as well get a bit of a closure on that. Okay, few other characters. Correct me if I'm wrong, Roughnut is one character that's not in the books.
Correct.
If I'm not mistaken, there is a Tough Nut, but mostly in...
There is a Tough Nut, but he doesn't really get any character development of any kind.
Poor Tough.
Yeah, we just know that he's a little bit of a, tough character, hence his name. But you don't get that many scenes with him at all. He's nothing, especially nothing like the Tough Nut that we see in the DreamWorks franchise.
Yeah. He's not T.J. Miller. Get him out of here. And the Snotlout is a douche, pretty much like his movie counterpart. Maybe even more, but he's the one character that dies, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Big spoiler for the 11th book.
Oh, but
Um,
that's such an amazing scene.
But like,
Yes.
you know,
Haddock, you sound like you were waiting for it. Like, yes, finally he died.
Okay, so this is my personal perspective of Snotlout throughout the book series. For the first 10 and a half books, you want to scream at him in anger, and he is frustrating because he's there undermining Hiccup. He's trying to kill Hiccup repeatedly. He's trying to take over Hiccup's position of power and become the new chief of Berk. He actually succeeds in becoming chief of Berk while Hiccup gets exiled. And so Snotlout becomes an antagonist to Hiccup. And so for the first 10 and a half books, you're sort of, it's not that you hate him, but you do hate him. And you get annoyed at him and you're frustrated with him. And then it's the scene, Hiccup and Snotlout have this duel. Snotlout's trying to kill his cousin. Finally, the fight scene ends. And it's at that point that Snotlout breaks down and admits, I've always been jealous of you, Hiccup, everything that you are going to become. I've always wanted to become this. Snotlout turns over and allies with Hiccup in the first scene where Snotlout and Hiccup are working together is the scene where Snotlout dies. And at that point, for the second half of book 11, you're screaming and you're rooting for Snotlout, and he just goes out and he does this self-sacrifice to save Hiccup's life. And it's such a heroic way of dying. But for the last half of that book, you find yourself screaming and wailing and mourning Snotlout, even though he's a character that for the majority of the series you were just irritated with.
and this was something like reading the 11th book, right? Getting the 11th book and reading through it. This was something that legitimately surprised me, right? Like, I'm someone who generally has a pretty good handle of, likes to think I have a pretty good handle of stories and where they're going, and I can figure out sometimes where they're going before they get there. This one surprised me. Like, I did not expect her to kill Snotlout. On top of that, I absolutely assumed that somewhere in the 12th book she would have something written down like, oh, he wasn't actually dead. Absolutely assumed that. Because there was no way she would kill off a character, that Krista Cow would kill off a character who's been as important as Snotlout has throughout the books. Maybe not in the best of ways, but definitely important. And it legitimately surprised me.
When he was killed off, the movies and the franchise and the DreamWorks franchise was already a thing, right?
Yes.
So
yes, the 11th book was released in 2013. So I think before the second movie.
Yeah, that's like Riders Defenders kind of territory. So on that, and Snotlout is popular among the fandom, so it's a character that you kind of take a risk with killing. When I think about it, kinda.
To the book fans, maybe not as much at that time, but again, how she did it, you honestly just fell in love with him immediately. Like, it was such a turnaround, and like, you've been kind of led up, I think, up until like book 10, right? Like. And she kind of does foreshadow this to a degree as well by she gives you a bit of backstory on Alvin at one point earlier in the books, and how Alvin basically in a way, it was Alvin's doing that made it possible for Hiccup to be around and to kind of foil his plans every now and again, right? Like, if Alvin hadn't have betrayed, who's the character?
Are you talking about Alvin's wife?
Not Alvin's wife, but Stoics.
Oh, the woman he. Oh.
Like the man Valarama was supposed to have married. I cannot remember his name.
Humongously hotshot.
Yes, humongously hotshot. That was Valarama, Hiccup's mother in the books, was supposed to have married him, but thanks to some doing of Alvin, he ended up getting trapped and jailed basically. And it was, Val couldn't marry him anymore. And that was thanks to Alvin's doing. And it was Stoic who ended up marrying Val. And, thanks to that, Hiccup came to be, right? So Alvin ended up, in a way, it was Alvin's doing that, made Hiccup into who he is now and, kind of brought him this kind of pain. And you kind of hear Alvin talk about, or if I'm not mistaken, in the books at a few different points, like, why are you always here to screw things up for me? Why? And, a little bit after that is when we get, the backstory of how, Alvin and Humongously Hotshot, their bit of backstory and kind of how Alvin betrayed him and screwed him over. And I think that kind of plays into Snotlout, to a degree of how Snotlout treats Hiccup, in how there's always, all the characters are kind of creating these issues for themselves in a way. They do something to someone else that ends up reflecting on something in the future that they now have to deal with. In my opinion.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I agree with that. And yeah, no, it's very effectively done. And you're right that Cressida Cowell set up everything down to Snotlout's transformation from the very beginning. You do see Snotlout becoming increasingly worse, but also increasingly unstable. You do see once Snotlout becomes chief, you see that insecurity where he's even, enslaving his own uncle and father to try to keep control and becoming increasingly ashamed of himself while he's doing so. So, you have all that built up so that once Snotlout's transformation happens, it feels so genuine that you as readers cannot help but just get on board with Snotlout becoming who he is, becoming that hero that Hiccup knows his cousin could always become. And so you're just rooting for Snotlout, and he's doing such an amazing, heroic act that when he died, I cried much harder for Snotlout's death than I did for Snowick in How to Train Your Dragon 2. No contest.
Ooh. Bold claim there.
Oh, it's true, though.
No. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying that's a bold statement.
Yeah.
Okay, one last thing to say while comparing the books to the movies. Even though the message of individuality and everything is present in the first movie, there is something I did think about. In the original book, when Hiccup and Fishlegs are reading the How to Train a Dragon book, there's one page in it. Scream at it. And which is a great moment. The way it was built up, the way it was revealed, great. But then Hiccup finds this other way, which is actually become friends with your dragon. And, tell it jokes, feed it, let it sleep with you,
Which isn't a perfect way, by the way.
It isn't the perfect way, but, it's something about it.
Every now and again doesn't listen to Hiccup.
Every now and then?
Most of the time.
There we are.
95% of the time. But anyway, the point is Hiccup trying to be friends with Toothless. And in some sense, I would argue that this kind of arc was actually put into the second film, because when you think about it, Drago trains his dragons by yelling at them. That's all he does. He yells at them, and they're his. But then at the end of it, Hiccup and Toothless's bond does manage to break the Alpha's control, and Hiccup also tells them, now you get it, this is what it is to earn a dragon's loyalty. Do you think that was intentional?
That's really a fascinating parallel, because usually when I look at How to Train Your Dragon 2, I see most of the book parallels being from the later half of the book series, around the book 9 to 10 range. Because you can do a lot of comparisons between the Red Death and the Bewilderbeast Control. You can do comparisons between Drago's goals and Valka's belief that humans and dragons must be separate, compared to Furious's Reign of Terror and the reason why he's fighting. So that's usually how I look at How to Train Your Dragon 2, is a little bit, either accidentally or intentionally paralleling later parts of the book series. It's interesting for me to hear a comparison to the very first book in How to Train Your Dragon 2.
Okay, glad to hear that.
Speaking of, before we move on real quick, speaking of similarities between the books and the movies and the shows, I would actually like to bring up Alvin briefly from the books. A character, who I've said before. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say that I know this, going back to book spoilers, I know that apparently Alvin is Fishleg's father.
Yes.
Yes.
Surprisingly enough.
Yeah, so can you imagine Mark Hamill delivering the well-known line of, I am your father, when he played the character this line was said to?
I think there's a reason they got him to play that character.
He did a fantastic job. Absolutely fantastic.
But agreed. But actually, in my opinion, right, watching Riders of Berk and going back, watching a few episodes of Riders of Berk first, and then getting into the books and getting further and further into the books, and then finishing up Riders of Berk, I don't think Alvin from the show is a parallel to Alvin from the movies. Like, I wouldn't compare those two characters.
Alvin from the movies. Alvin wasn't in the movies.
Alvin from the books. When I look at Alvin from the books, I see when I look at Riders of Berk character and the shows and the movies in general, the character I think who most kind of represents Alvin from the books is Mildew. In the fact that
even in the design department, like going by the drawings.
Not just that, like it's the fact that Mildew ends up almost always, except for the one time where it's kind of Alvin who ruins his plans, Mildew always ends up ruining his own plans in some way, shape, or form, and he blames it on Hiccup. And you can see, throughout the books, Alvin slowly becomes more and more unstable as well, right? Like, it's always talked about how every time they meet Alvin, his description is always much worse than what it was in the last time you met Alvin. Like, it's never all that great for Alvin. Like, he always goes through, forgive my language, he always goes through hell and back, and he always comes back, but every time he comes back, he's just a little bit worse, and a little bit more unstable, and a little bit more furious, and a little bit more directing his revenge, not at anyone, not in the second book, right? Like, we see, Hiccup defeats Alvin, they leave him. In the third book, Alvin's back, but he's still not necessarily after Hiccup. He's just wanting the Grimbeard the Ghastly's treasure still. As time goes on, that revenge, it becomes more and more about revenge, and he just wants to get back at Hiccup. It's just about Hiccup. That's the only one he's after. And we see that in Mildew as well. For me personally, at least I do. And we see Mildew go from, I just want the dragons off of Berk, and I want, there to be no dragons on Berk, to, all right, a little bit more specifically targeting Toothless off of Berk, to then just plain out going, I want to get back at Hiccup. And you kind of see that throughout Riders of Berk, that change to slowly, gradually getting a little bit more and a little bit more desperate, to the point where he's siding with Alvin of the Outcasts to try and actually just outright destroy Berk, as well as he's doing the very thing, which is taming dragons, that he doesn't want Berk to be doing. I mean, I've always found that very interesting.
It is.
Yeah, also, one more thing to close this entire thing. Mildew would be the person who gets annoyed at the dragon for pooping in his helmet.
Absolutely.
My cabbages!
Different franchise, but I'll take that reference.
It still works for Mildew too.
It's sort of true though. Like, Mildew is like the cabbage guy of the How to Train Your Dragon world. Every single time the dragon destroys cabbages.
So we can give the cabbage guy one up. He didn't
My
turn
ship.
evil.
He didn't turn evil, yes.
But he was arrested in Korra, if I remember correctly.
He was, but he wasn't evil. He was framed.
Yeah. Okay.
Cabbage Corp was framed.
Yeah, the third Avatar series will be about breaking him out of jail or something. No, he's the Avatar. Okay. So, guys, we went through the longest subsection of this episode. So, just a few more points of discussion to close this off, pretty much. Would you guys want to see an adaptation of How to Train Your Dragon that is closer to the book?
Yes. Although I think it would, first of all, work best if it is very distinctly different from the current DreamWorks franchise. We don't want viewers getting those confused or trying to compare them. I would want something that would probably be about maybe one season of a television series and done in 2D animation to sort of give a nice call out to Cressida's wonderful illustrations in the books.
Yeah, I will say that I think an adaptation to a TV show will work better for this kind of story than a full-length feature.
Yeah, I don't think
which is probably the reason why the original movie, which was supposed to be a lot closer to the book, was never made, and they changed that.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, the original movie like that they were making for How to Train Your Dragon was very much similar to the books. In
Yeah, originally it was very like when
the animation was
before
different. I think
Chris
it
and
was 2D animation for that movie.
I never
I'm
saw
not
the
sure about
2D
this.
animation
I,
point,
I
but I
never
did see
saw it,
tests.
but I think they brought it up. Like, I
I
think they
I
talked about
did
it.
Okay.
I do know that it was supposed to be close, very loyal to the book before Chris Sanders and Dindobla stepped in.
Hmm.
And then it was like, listen, and then they told them, listen, this needs a page one rewrite. Take a few elements, but don't feel like they told them don't be as so loyal to the book. You can go as far away from it as you want.
And I think that was a good choice on DreamWorks' part. As you pointed out, the book series would not work as a feature-length film. And so I think that what they did was a very good change. And again, the entire first movie, you can tell, is based off of the first book. Point by point by plot point, you just have those little changes that, result in a very different dramatic story. But yeah, I think it was a good change. It still is interesting to see the old artwork and storyboards, and even there was a test animation of Hiccup fighting with what's now the Terrible Terror, and Hiccup has the bright red hair, and he's with, that little green Toothless that we know from the books.
Yeah, I always thought that after reading that Toothless was supposed to be tiny and green in the books, I saw the Terrible Terrors as what this version of Toothless would have been in the movies.
Well, we actually get that version of Toothless when we meet the Terrible Terrors for the first time in the movies, where Hiccup tells them in the scene, everything we know about you is wrong. Like it's
Yeah,
pretty.
that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much Toothless right there. They reference it pretty hard, and they've even said it themselves. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's supposed to be like book Toothless in a way.
Yeah, most likely. So the one answer I think from all of us is we would like to see an adaptation that's closer to the books, but not as a feature-length film.
Yeah, I would agree. It would definitely be interesting to see. I don't know how well it would work, but I would definitely be interested in watching it.
I think it would work. I do think that it would work. The books already do have sort of a sense of episodes. I do think that you could split up some of the later books into 2 parts. Mm-hmm. But I do think it would work.
Okay.
It would take a little bit of, it would take a very good writing team. They would have to know how to do it. But I do think it could be successful if they did it right.
Well, who knows? Maybe in the faraway future. But speaking of the show, however, people do say that the show is closer to the books than the movies. And to be honest, there are a lot of elements from the books that make appearances in the show. Like from the very first book, there's the Dragons competition, which determines which young Viking is being exiled from the tribe. That was a plot. That was a plot in Riders, if I remember correctly, where Hiccup and Snutout eventually were in competition to see who toughest. Yes, that was a thing from the books that were.
No one was going to get expelled from the tribe if anyone lost that, though.
Yeah, but the overall competition idea is there because one of the last competition was eventually controlling your dragon. It was a dragon race, and that was the whole point of the toughest in the book. Mm-hmm. So there's that dragon male, something that so far in the DreamWorks franchise was only in the show.
Yeah. The way that I see it is that while there are a lot of Easter eggs and parallels between the shows and the books, I don't say that this is the point where the books are closest to the DreamWorks franchise. I say that the first movie is closest to the first book. That's the closest we get. The thing is, the television series is so long that you can see those Easter eggs. And once people start picking up the Easter eggs, they're going to have that confirmation bias of every single time you see something that could possibly be a parallel to the books. They're going to take it that way. So I feel that it's a little overstated about how much the television series is like the books. It's not at all, but
Also,
yeah.
I think there also one thing. I'm not sure if if they do it in Race to the Edge as well. I think they do, but at the beginning of each episode, they will say based on the How to Train a Dragon book series by Cressida Cowell and not the movies.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that gives the people the wrong idea. But there's one thing I do want to bring up. When I was reading How to Be a Pirate right now, something about its plot reminded me a lot of the episode Portrait of Hiccup as a Buffman.
Portrait of Hiccup as a Buffman, I would say, is the single episode that is closest in character and everything to the book series. Even if you consider what the entire plot of Portrait of a Hiccup as a young Buffman is about, it's a story where Hiccup feels that he is not living up to his father's expectations of a more traditional, strong Viking.
And also the thing...
And then searching for a treasure.
Yeah, the treasure and the fact that he's apparently related to this Hamish who hid the treasure, where he was also a Hiccup. So,
absolutely.
So that was a very interesting, and also the treasure that he finds, but at the end of the day doesn't bring back. So, even though it's for different reasons in the episode and the book. But
Hamish is Grimbeard the Ghastly confirmed.
I won't say this, but yeah, sure, whatever.
He's like a combination of Grimbeard and Hiccup the, second/first, depending on how you want to talk about Hiccup's past.
I would agree with Haddock, though. I think there's a lot of nods, especially in Riders of Berk. Defenders of Berk, there's a little bit less so, but I think they're still there. Race to the Edge, I really don't think there's been as many nods to the books.
I see a lot of nods, but I wouldn't say it's as direct.
Also, one thing I didn't notice, apparently the snot loud, oi, oi, oi cry is from the books. I saw it in How to Speak Dragonese.
Huh. I don't remember that.
It's been a while.
It's fresh in my mind, so I remember it.
You read it an hour ago. You're the authority.
Well, now it's 2 hours ago, but yeah. Anyway, so with all of this said and done, what do you prefer, the books or the movies?
I hate picking favorites, and sometimes it feels artificial to pick favorites when I don't distinctly have one thing that I love more than the other.
And you know what? Before the pick, let's just put this out there. We love the movies for what they are, and we love the books for what they are. Just because we prefer one thing over the other doesn't mean we discredit the other medium. So we put it out there. Now let's choose.
If people have to twist my arm by saying one or the other, I would say the books every time to their answer. So that's probably true about what I subconsciously like better, is that I prefer the books. There's amazing writing devices, symbolism, Chekhov's gun, just very deep and wise quotes in there. I think the books are my special place in my heart, personally.
Okay. Wolf, what about you?
Personally, again, I prefer them both. So there you go.
You can't do that. You need to choose. We can cheat.
I always do, though. I've gotten away with not giving answers before, HC.
Well, if you could rank How to Train a Dragon Confessions in earlier episodes, you can choose between the books and the movies.
Cheated on those too, but if I had to say, I would say, looking at the movies and the books, I would say I prefer the books overall. Looking at the movies overall so far, the first and second, and looking at the books overall, from 1 to 12. I would say I prefer the books overall, but if you really wanted me to get detailed, I think the first movie would be my go-to for, like, I prefer the first movie over the books because of what the first movie does, and just,
Yes.
you know, just at the adaptation, just everything the first movie does with the show don't tell idea, and just the silence of it and what it does with that silence. I prefer that more, but overall, I would look at the books, and I would say I prefer overall the books. They would be my go-to. Again, for just what they do and just the respect of the audience, and just her writing. It's just absolutely amazing and wonderful throughout.
Okay, in terms of me, this is probably coming from a person who hasn't read all of the books, and the person who needs to disagree with the majority, apparently. because, but I prefer the movies just because the movies I felt gave me more than the books. Again, saying this as someone who only read 3 books from a 12 book franchise, so. To all of those listening, keep that in mind. I do think, however, that the movies left more of an impact on me. Like, let's say I didn't get the idea to start this podcast because of the books necessarily. Maybe if my history with the franchise would have been different, then I would have said something else. But as of now, the movies touch me personally more. Not to discredit the books are great from what I've read, but I'll have to give my vote for the movies.
And there's something certainly to be said that both the books and the movies have very impacting moments in them, and different parts of each of them will resonate differently with each of us based on our own personal experiences.
Also, one thing, like I said, I was always more of a movie person than a book person, so maybe that has something to do with this as well. So again, this is all subjective.
Oh yeah, these are always our opinions.
And apparently, but I can say this, since he didn't read any of the books, Rush will probably have to say movies. So yay.
A good assumption.
Okay, anything else we want to add on the How to Train Your Dragon books before we close episode 50?
Haddock?
Oh goodness, I don't know. I mean, there's always more to be said about the books. I mean, you know, if we want to talk about the beautiful quotes that are in there, I even have quotes in front of me. There's just, you can go on and on about these things, but I feel like we've done a pretty good job having a conversation that gets into some of the reasons that these books are interesting, and again, compared them with the DreamWorks franchise.
Yep. Like, we've been talking for over an hour now, I think. Right?
Yeah, it's been a good conversation.
I don't have the recording time, but yeah, close to.
Actually,
okay, so I would recommend the best quote from the book, one that doesn't appear too often, but is definitely synonymous with the books. It is a story of how to be a hero the hard way, and it is one of my favorite quotes from a book series that I have seen and read thus far.
Yeah, it's a really good quote.
One of the ones that really sang with me that came from the book series is, for a hero cannot triumph all the time. Sometimes he will be defeated, and how he faces that defeat is a test of his character. Yep.
100%.
Going back to that. Yeah.
Really smart line. Really good line.
They're everywhere.
I'm Facebooking this right after we're done. Okay. So this has been all for episode 50 of the Berkcast. We hope you enjoyed. If you read the books and you want to share with us your favorite moments from it, favorite lines, favorite whatever, you can do this through the Berk Formvine forums. We're all there. Maybe not Haddock. Are you on the Berk Formvine forums?
I'm not currently, but that doesn't mean that I can't appear there and check it out.
Okay, so at least Wolf, Rush, and I are there, so you can tell us about this there. You can also find us on Twitter, where we are Berkcast with a capital B, capital C. On Tumblr, we are Berkcast Team. And Haddock, tell the listeners how they can find you.
So I am probably the most findable on Tumblr. My URL is kingofthewilderwest. All lowercase, no dashes, no spaces, no anything. That will be the way to find me. And it should be pretty obvious that this is a How to Train Your Dragon analysis blog, although the last few days have been a little skewed toward a different television series, so apologies about that anomaly.
It's still DreamWorks based, though.
It is still DreamWorks based. That is very true. Very true.
Okay. Still under the House of the Ogre, I guess you could say.
Oh boy.
Well, because Disney is the House of the Mouse, so you need to go with something. Anyway, so like I said, this is all for the episode 50 of the. But thank you for keeping us going for 50 episodes, even though this was a fun ride, and we'll see you all next time. Take care.
Bye bye.